This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under-18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 559 for July 22nd, 2018. Coming up on today's show, my partners make life decisions without me. That's coming up on today's show. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Minx, and sitting with me today in the co-host chair is Lusty Guy.
Happy and lucky to be here, as always. Hello, everybody.
It's nice to have you back. It's been a while.
It's nice to be back. And
we've been kind of busy.
We've both been busy, and the production schedule's been a little off.
Yeah, and we had a great time. It was a couple weeks ago at this point, but we had a great time at Miss FisherCon. Lusty Guy was my arm candy and producer for the event, and it was a lot of fun. I got to indulge my love of 1920s costuming and just be totally fabulous all weekend, and Lusty Guy put up with me, which is saying something.
You know, it was fun. It was really nice. It was kind of wonderful, in fact, to see all of these women come together and take such enjoyment in a shared activity. And it's always nice to see you in a good mood. And, you know, many thanks, Bianca, for having us down there. It was a good time. And then I did maybe spend too much money at the strip clubs in Portland because, you know, you got to do that when you're a woman.
Of course. Yeah, we had a really good time. Bianca and the others put on a fabulous event, and we will have a link to that in the show notes if you want to get on the email newsletter for next year's Miss FisherCon. And if you didn't happen to listen to episode 558, go back and check the show notes for 558 so you can find out more of what Miss FisherCon actually was, because I realized we didn't say in this episode. Now you have to go listen to another one. Haha, that's how we get you. And our topic this week comes from the email inbox. It was a bit lengthy, so let's give maybe a quick summary of our letter writer's letter together.
And that's going to be a trick. This was a pretty long letter, and really the details and the exact wording are important, but if we did a complete reading of it, it would
take forever.
So here's a summary.
So he says, I'm a 39-year-old queer male in a quad with his partner T of 10 years, and then this other couple, W and E. They did long distance for 2 years, and then T and he moved the 200 miles to the same town as W and E.
Right, about 7 years ago.
Yes.
And when they got there, he says that occasionally the conversation of cohabitation came up. They did live together at first for a few months. And then he and his main partner got their own place. And they had a conversation as a foursome about cohabitation occasionally. But that's all he says, is those conversations happened occasionally. Skip forward, and then the other couple decides to buy a house.
2 years ago, W and E decided to look for a bigger house that would accommodate everybody. Basically, they went through the home buying process and then brought him and T in at the end of it when they basically picked the house and said, hey, does this work for you?
Right. And knowing that, again, that he had said that he was not ready to cohabitate and not ready to buy a house.
Yeah, he'd said he wasn't financially ready.
Right.
Yes. He said that the house was great, but that he felt left out of that process.
Specifically, he says, what bothered me was that they felt the tour we got after they had picked a house meant that the four of us had decided on the house together. And I think that phrasing is important. We'll get back to it.
And then he writes that he noticed that W and E continued to do, quote, little things that indicated to him that they were thinking more like a couple than as a quad.
And again, that's a direct quote. And again, I'm going to say that's important, and we'll get back to it.
Yes. And he said they made some inside jokes, and it finally came out that they were considering adopting a teenager. Turns out that kids, until very recently, had been a deal breaker for him. And then they mentioned that at this point, it wasn't all that serious. It was a possibility they were just exploring. But he basically, when he discovered that, really shut down emotionally. He said he was in a mess
came home after and curled up in a ball.
Yeah. In the end, he finishes his letter saying, I feel completely devalued, disrespected, and betrayed. T is also really unhappy with the situation, and he's planning to confront them this weekend. I'm kind of terrified. I know that this is a potentially relationship-ending conversation, and I don't know what to do. I know that ultimatums are pretty much never a good idea, but I also know I can't be happy if things continue the way they are.
I need to be an equal partner in my relationships. The irony is that now I am at a point in my life where kids would not automatically be a deal breaker. I can see circumstances where I would be okay with there being children, teenagers involved, and even an enrichment in my life. But none of them know that. And we have such huge glaring issues that have to be resolved before we can even start that conversation. Another direct quote that I feel is really important.
I think that we agree that, yes, there are some glaring issues that need to be resolved.
It sure looks that way.
So first thing is always to say, I'm really sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry this is so difficult. And I'm sorry that you had a situation where you ended up curled in a ball and experiencing all these negative emotions. Regardless of the type of relationship you're in, that is never very fun. So let's see what we can do that will help maybe shine a little light on that and give you a little bit of hope.
Charge!
Yeah. I think we both agree that you're probably right. You're not going to be happy if things continue like this. I don't think this necessarily needs to be a confrontation. I think it's usually a positive thing when a partner can come in and say, hey, there's this thing that's been bothering me. I'd really like to talk to you guys about it and see if we can find a good resolution for this. I personally have come to really appreciate it. I mean, yeah, there's always still that little pitter-patter of fear in my heart when someone says, can we talk? But I think it's usually a good thing. I just am at a point where I have a really high level of trust in my partners, but the beginning of that resolutionatory process, I'm making up words here. Basically, it's good to say what you're thinking.
Generally true, absolutely. Almost universally true. So here's the thing. When I read this, I see a couple of patterns going on that contribute to what's happening that I think you may not be aware of. And in the Own Your Own Poo section, I'm going to look at those. For example, when you say that you were bothered because they felt that the tour we had gotten had picked a house, meant that the four of us had decided on the house together. You're being bothered by your perception of their mental state. And that's a pretty common habit here. What I see happening is that you think that you understand how they feel. You're doing a little mind reading, and you're getting upset then by how you think they feel.
Well, and also by how he feels.
Well, that's right. But I'm specifically talking about this one thing, right? Where, you are, again, assuming you know how they feel and getting upset by that.
How could they possibly think that was okay?
Focus on their actions. From what you describe here, you said you weren't but you were not able yet to buy a house. You were not able to cohabitate. They were already cohabitating and they decided to buy a house. Unless you had said to them, hey, before you guys buy a house, talk to me. I want to be involved. And they had said, yes, we will do that. There's no particular foul being done in that series of actions. Now, you're okay, and it's great if you feel like you want to be involved in a house purchase, but you got to tell them that.
Yeah.
And we don't see anywhere where you have ever told them that.
Yeah, I noticed that too, that at least in what you wrote, it seems like I never see a place where you actually specifically asked for what you wanted. I don't see a place where you said, hey, in the event that we do cohabitate, I really want to be in on every phase of that home buying process, even if I'm not contributing financially. That's what I want. Now, they could always say, no, you're not contributing financially, fuck you. But it doesn't sound to me like you actually made them aware that that's something you're interested in. It's entirely possible there's some people out there that are like, whoop, the final choice of the house shows up and I don't have to deal with that whole process and all I have to do is walk in and say, yep, thumbs up. Awesome. Like they had no way of knowing because you didn't tell them that you wanted to be involved early on in the process. Some people might want it, some people might not.
Well, and that illustrates another great point, which is, there's an absence of an assumption of goodwill here. without an explicit agreement that you wanted to be involved in their decision to make, to purchase this house, they still decided to bring you in, and they still decided to purchase a house that you agreed was a great house and that would in the future allow for the cohabitation to happen, even though you weren't ready for it now. With a little bit of assumption of goodwill, it's easy to see that all as positive things rather than as negative things.
Exactly. And I hope you're hearing that we're giving you a couple of inflection points where in the future you can opt to start a conversation and have things be clear and out in the open. If you're even talking about moving in together, a house or kids or anything like that, it's a really good time to have these theoretical conversations. But while you're doing that, talk about, this is what I would want. I want to be involved. I don't want to be involved. I want this. I want that. You may not get what you want, but asking for it and stating up front, that way they'll know when it does come down to seriously adopting a child, buying a house, whatever, they'll be like, oh, remember when he said he wanted to be involved in this from day one? Or remember when he said he didn't want to have anything to do with it until we made the decision, he just wanted to give it a rubber stamp? Then they know. Now, that being said, we're not all perfect. Sometimes we, do things at a different point. It's always easier in hindsight. When they did purchase the house and you had that feeling, that's another inflection point. You could go to them and say, hey, this thing happened and I'm feeling kind of weird about it. And I realized that it's because I had wanted to be involved in that process. And I know you guys are probably trying to save me labor or something, but in the future, these big decisions, I want to be involved in them. There's another inflection point, right? So it's all about asking for what you want. And as Lusty Guy said, assuming goodwill all around. Let's assume their intentions are good in the absence of abuse, which I didn't see any of in this letter.
Well, yeah, that's right. And when you say the irony is at the point now when you might want to have kids, but you can't tell them, actually now is exactly the time to tell them. If you're at a point where you feel like you can have kids, why argue and have the conflict with everybody assuming you're not at that point? Begin the habit of full disclosure. Put everything on the table. If you want to be involved in life decisions and you want to have an entangled shared life, say so. And if they say, yes, we want to have that, and then continue behaving as if they're not going to give you that consideration, then you got some learning to do. Absolutely.
Then you have decisions to make, right?
But if you have not said that to them and they have not made that agreement, to be hurt when they don't behave that way tells you need to talk to them.
Yeah.
What's happening is you have an expectation that's not being met because it hasn't been expressed.
Yes, communicate early and often. All the comedic movies about constant truth-telling to the contrary, more disclosure is generally better in relationships.
Absolutely.
And early and often. We are a big fan. We teach in our Kicking Polydrama on its Ass course that when you start having the seed of something that feels a little weird, even if you don't know what it is yet, you should go to your partners and say, hey, I'm feeling something weird about this decision that was made or this thing that happened last week, even if you don't know what it is yet. Communicate early and often. And then you'll find that your partners, which it sounds like, they are giving indications generally that they do want to cohabitate and share lives with you, right? That it will make it much easier for them to accommodate you and to bring you in on that process.
Now, I want to be really careful here that I'm not making the impression that I'm telling you you're doing things wrong or that the way you feel is wrong, because that's not true. You have every right to feel as you feel. And I can see how if I had thought that, these were people who I wanted to have an entangled life with, and without me they were deciding to become parents, I would be a little affronted too.
That's what I said in the beginning. Like in my early poly years, things like this happened to me all the time. And it's because I didn't realize that I hadn't voiced my expectations. I was all butthurt over something that I never realized. I didn't actually say. I just assumed that people would know that that's of course what I would want, because doesn't everybody want that? Well, I quickly found out, no, not everybody wants that. Even if you had a casual conversation, making it super clear is much easier, and there's much less drama and much less confrontation, which I don't know about you, but I'm not a fan of confrontation.
So to go back to principles, I think the principles that are involved here are assume goodwill whenever you can, right? Don't play the mind reading game. You're getting upset because you think you know how they feel. Focus on behaviors. And don't expect them to play the mind reading game. If you haven't communicated an expectation, well, then it might not get met.
Yep.
Once it's communicated and agreed to be met, it's another ball of wax. And don't keep secrets. If you really feel like you're able to discuss the possibility of having a kid in your life now, say so.
Ask for what you want. And you can even, it's okay to say, I'm not sure. It's okay to say this is not a yes, but that's okay. And you can always change your mind too. It's okay to ask for what you want, say what you need, and you will have to accept that you may not get it, but at least when it's on the table, now the four of you are talking about this, and then you don't have to worry about expectations, unvoiced expectations not being met, because that really is the worst. Especially me, when I realize after something has happened that I had an expectation that I didn't even know I had. And I'm like, now I'm disappointed. I didn't even know I had it, so I couldn't ask for it. Fuck. That really sucks.
Yep. But in the final analysis, good luck. I hope your guys' conversation went well. And, that we get a letter here pretty soon saying
everything's
is great.
Awesome and we're moving in and they're adopting an awesome kid. That would be great. I hope that was helpful. It's time for your Happy Poly Moment of the Week, brought to you by Fubbly polyamorists everywhere. This week's Happy Poly Moment is from Alan, who said, "Hi again, Minx. As a guy who got polybombed a year and a half ago, I would never have guessed I would be passing on a Happy Poly Moment."
Polybombed. I love that term.
Is it me, or does it sound like the beginning of one of those Penthouse letters? I never thought I'd be writing a letter like this.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, it kind of does.
I love it.
That's two strokes there.
He writes, "When my wife asked me to consider polyamory so she could ethically explore her resurgent feelings for an old college boyfriend, I agreed to explore the possibility, and after a lot of processing, consented to give poly a try. Although by no means opposed to the idea of also having a poly partner, it wasn't a pressing priority, and I really didn't even explore the options. However, in an effort to better understand poly, I did participate in various online poly venues and quite unexpectedly found that I developed a special friendship with someone I encountered there."
Chicka bow wow. I've had the porn music running under my head.
Ever since I said
Ever since
Penthouse.
you said it sounds. So to anybody listening out there, for the rest of the letter as she finishes, just have that porn music running in the back of your head. It kind of makes it more fun.
We'll see if I can find some for a music bed. Unfortunately, we were several hundred miles apart, but did eventually get to spend a recent weekend together. She did need a babysitter for the weekend, so her local primary partner, assisted by another poly friend, stayed with the kids so she could spend the weekend with me. We had a terrific time, including a Saturday night get-together in which I met both of her other partners, one of whom brought his wife, and a couple other poly friends as well. Her primary partner treated me like family, and everyone involved was more than friendly and welcoming. Just a really impressive experience."
That's really cool. Our jokes aside through the course of that letter, that one really makes me smile. It warms the dark embers of my black little heart.
And we have a lot of people to thank, mostly because we have new playmates in the last few months. Because of a weird setting in my inbox, I didn't see that so many new people had joined. So, welcome Tara, Christopher, Catherine, Nicola, Carrie, Elizabeth, Tony, and Heidi to the Poly Weekly Playmates. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to keep the show going.
Yay, thank you all very much.
And I think that about wraps it up for today's show. We are a free resource. We help hundreds of thousands of people navigate their introduction to and continued success with polyamory. Your donations and emails help keep this podcast free and awesome for everyone inside and outside the community. Questions, comments, and feedback, email polyweekly@gmail.com or call 802-505-POLY. If you want to book us for something, then contact Lusty Guy. Or if you want to appear on the show, contact Lusty Guy. LustyGuy@polyweekly.com. We're also on Facebook.com/polyweekly, Twitter @polyweekly, and @cunningminx, and most other places on the web as well. Our website, where you can find the show notes and all our show archives, are at polyweekly.com. Thanks for listening, and remember, bow chicka wow wow. It's not all about the sex.